Ethics in Software Engineering with Brian Rinaldi and Jem Young.
All right, so I am going to focus on our panel over here and introduce Jem, who's sitting all the way over there on the left. Wave, Jem. So Jem is going to kind of lead the panel discussion on ethics. Jem and I met through he spoke at an event I ran a while back, and it was a long training event. It was like full 8-hour day, all about JavaScript, and he had the unfortunate luck of being the last session of the day, and I had been sitting through, at that point, 6 hours of sessions, and my brain was fried, and I was about to collapse. And Jem had such energy and just such passion about his topic that it just really perked me back up, and it was an excellent experience. I learned a ton, so I wanted to have him back. So thanks, Jem, for doing this.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, go ahead. Let's get started.
Thank you for that intro. I should point out that doing that class that I did was a favor for Brian Holt, who was a panelist on Front End Happy Hour.
Where was he? He bailed?
He bailed. He is a slacker, so I had to pull his weight for a bit. That's okay. I had a lot of fun doing it. But thanks again, Brian.
And one quick note, just we can hear you. Just you might have to speak up a little bit because it's a little bit soft, but we can hear you.
Okay. If I'm ever too quiet, just give me like a half thumb, something like that. But thanks for the intro. Like Brian said, my name is Jem Young. I'm a senior software engineer here at Netflix, and we are live here at Netflix. And I want to talk about something that I think is really important in software engineering that we don't talk about a lot, which is ethics. Maybe 10, 20 years ago, when you're getting a CS degree, an ethics class was actually required learning for everybody becoming a software engineer. No longer is that the case. In fact, many software engineers don't have CS degrees, which is absolutely fine. But in doing that, we lost that ability to have that kind of moral compass, moral foundation that I think a lot of the early pioneers in computer software had. But we've kind of lost that a bit along the way. And I wanted to have a panel with a lot of the smartest people that I know talk about the future. They're coming. But I want to talk about the current and future state of ethics in software engineering. So, like I said, my name is Jem Young. I'm a senior software engineer here at Netflix. Ryan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm Ryan Burgess. I'm a software engineering manager at Netflix.
My name's Augustus Yoon. I'm a front-end engineer at Evernote.
I'm Ryan Inklum, and I'm a software engineer here at Netflix as well.
I'm Stacey London. I'm a senior front-end engineer at Atlassian.
And I'm Mars Julian. I'm a senior software engineer at Netflix as well.
And if you can't tell, we are all part of a...
Sorry, Jim, one quick thing. For some reason, the ladies have mics that work awesome, and your guys' mics are hard to hear. So maybe we can somehow... Is there a way we can pass theirs around, or... Sorry to be a pain.
We're going to... No, not a pain at all. Better now than 45 minutes in.
Yeah, no, because they sound great, but you guys are harder to hear.
All right, well, that also just means we should speak louder. How's that now, Brian?
That's better. Sorry about the dog here. You can tell this is live. That's better. Theirs is much louder, but we just do the best we can.
I will do my best to speak into the mic as loudly as possible. But we are all part of a podcast called Front End Happy Hour. If you can't tell, we have drinks in our hand, and what we do is we generally discuss front-end topics in kind of a jovial fashion, just a bunch of friends discussing software engineering. So this is the same type of discussion, just a bunch of friends talking about ethics and software engineering. Casual bar talk as people do here in Silicon Valley. But to open up the panel, what does ethics in software engineering mean relative to, say, other fields? So doctors have the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, things like that. Civil engineers have their own oaths they write about because they make bridges and buildings and things like that. But software engineering doesn't really have an official kind of oath or mantra that we try to adhere to. So what is the state of ethics in software engineering? What does it mean?
I think that's the thing is I don't think there's a definition of it. I think that there's, you spoke to doctors or civil engineers, and in software development or software engineering, we don't really actually have a set guidelines or anything. And I'm sure each company may have those, but not necessarily in our industry. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that.
I did some research because I myself didn't off the top of my head know if software engineering has any official ethics definitions for our industry, and it looks like there is. The IEEE CA or Computer Society did define something, but the fact that exists maybe and we don't, I didn't know about it. You're like, oh no.
Right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. But it has some definitions, which I found pretty interesting.
Awesome. What was the high level things that you found in there?
It was just a lot of stuff about how you interact with various entities. So like yourself, your coworkers, your colleagues, society as a whole, your employer, and like what it means to maybe do no harm or be a good person to other people that you work with. It kind of defines those structures.
I think what's interesting too in those principles that you're mentioning is if you look at them, they're ordered, or if that intentional. Yeah. So I mean, they're I don't know if they're ordered intentionally, but it maybe in terms of priority. But the first one that they list is the public interest, and then directly after that is your clients and employer. So the idea that like our business needs of our companies and the ones that we work for, and the skill sets that we're using are always going to be. We always have to consider the public interest at the same time, and perhaps as the primary.
Yeah, I guess a common, and this is by no means official, but I guess one common one that I do hear from people is saying like do right by our users. I think for a lot of like tech companies, like the focus is on what can we do for our users that are using our product, and how can we like respect what they want. So I think like big topics like data privacy like definitely come up when it comes to ethics. I think that's like one of the most common ones. I'm sure there are many others.
Atlassian, one of the company values is, can I swear? Is that like a thing? Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
Or will that be offensive to somebody? One of the company values is don't F the customer. And that's in writing in the value system.
Pretty well defined.
A bold statement.
Very bold.
So I'm glad that IEEE has a software engineering manifesto. I think there's a few of them out there. One of the issues is, one, ethics in software is completely relative, because unlike most fields which have some sort of ethical code, what we do like is everywhere. It's every field. It's not just medicine or science or math or something. Like it's every single industry out there. So when people say what's the public good, like can someone explain that a bit for me? Like what does that mean? And who's the public in this case? What if you work for the government? Do the government better than your customers? Or no one said it's going to be easy.
I mean, the government, I don't know if it'd be still like the public using that. It depends on the identity, I guess, at that point is like, what are you building? Like who's using it? And I think it just comes down to the users, and the user could be people within the government, but it could also be public facing. So I guess what it comes down to for me is users. That's who we should be caring about and defining who are our users, and what are we doing right by our users. And that could vary in different cases, like depending on what you're building.
I suppose an interesting thing with defining that is if the users are people you are unexpected. So like if you have like a site that's totally public and you don't control who comes to your site at all, like it could be anybody in the world, maybe that changes how you think about the ethics of your practices or how you build things versus where it's a closed group and maybe a known group. So maybe you're building like internal software that your users are like internal to the company. Maybe that changes things, maybe it doesn't, but I think that's maybe an interesting thing to think about.
I think a really interesting question for me whenever I think of ethics in software is the people building self-driving cars. Right? The user is the driver of the car for the most part, but what happens if it comes into a situation where you steer off a cliff or run over some people? Right? It's the classic trolley car problem.
Well, and it's not just the driver; it's everyone else.
Yeah,
like
right.
It's everyone that's near or around that vehicle. So yeah, that's a very good one. I like that.
Yeah, actually, one of my picks a long time ago was this site called Moral Machine, where you train, it like gives you scenarios of a self-driving car, and if it has to choose between like pregnant lady and like a dog, like you choose who it hits and it like train. It's kind of a dark.
I think even in the case of the self-driving cars thing, but there's always, you have to consider the business as well. Like that's, I think when you're training the models that self-driving cars use, everyone always, refers to the least harm done. But then the other question on the flip side, when you take into account the business, is who's going to buy a self-driving car that's going to drive you off a cliff? And I think that's like, in software engineering, I think this is a great question because it brings into like really clear view the dilemmas that we face, because for the business, you need to make a car that people are going to buy, but you also need to make a car that people feel comfortable having on the road. And those perspectives are completely different depending on what part of, like, if you're outside the car, if you're in the car, like who you are relative to that car. And I just think that's such an interesting problem because it's like right in front of you. These are the issues. These are the types of dilemmas that we're dealing with, or at least in that industry. Perhaps not in streaming, but
that's a great example. The self-driving cars. I think ethics in software engineering is about going the extra mile and protecting the user above all. Like they say in Tron, one of the great movies, like I fight for the user. Ideally, we all think that, but the truth is we don't, because there are people bots. There are people out there that write those pop under ads. There are people out there that write super cookies. There's a lot of hostile software engineers in the world. So one thing I really want to talk about was dispelling this myth of Silicon Valley and this like halo that we all do good all the time. It's just not true. There are people out there that write things that I think morally we would all disagree with. So my question is, how do you toe that line between I need to make money, I need to make a career, but also I disagree with what my company is doing? Like, essentially everybody has a price. How do you determine where that is? How do you determine when is too far? When is like this hostile to the user, but it's good for the business?
Ooh,
yeah.
Jeez. Wow, that's a tough.
That's how we do it on Tuesday.
I thought you were gonna go with something.
I think everyone needs a drink first.
Definitely requires a drink. Yeah, that's tough. I think, like, to me, I don't know where to draw the line. I think it's case by case, but I think you should feel comfortable pushing back on things and really questioning, whether it be coming from leadership or where are these things coming from, and question it. If you feel uncomfortable, I think you should be questioning it. I don't think that's really answering your question, Jem, but I think that it's really case by case, and I think at that point you shouldn't just take it for what it is. If you feel uncomfortable with something, you should absolutely be questioning it.
I think it's tricky. This, like, the you can get into things like, I'm the sole provider for my family. If I lose my job, I lose my insurance. My kid has medical needs that would be untenable without medical insurance. Those things have driven a lot of people's behavior, because people might put up with more than their ethical line draws for them because they're scared, and their livelihood is at stake. So things like that can actually like blur people's judgment because of fear. If your Maslow's hierarchy of needs isn't met, like, those are things that really drive decisions that maybe aren't the most bold decisions. They're ones out of fear.
I'll actually even add to that. I love that you said like sole provider, that kind of aspect. Luckily I have a green card now, but I was once on a visa, right, and a working visa, and that's tied to a company, and that's like, if I get let go, I have a pretty quick turnaround that I need to find another job, or I'm going back to Canada. So that can be another issue, is like, if you're pushing back too hard, then are you going to lose your job for that? And I can see that might blur the line a little bit more.
Yeah, not that it's good or bad, but it's just something I think that does influence how people decide to be ethical or not.
So I'll say a real potential scenario, that something as software engineers any of us could be in. Let's say, God forbid, you had a child and they have a heart condition, they need a transplant. You, as software engineer, have access to that database. You could theoretically move your child to the top of the list, and no one would ever know because you control that. You own that entire system. Yeah, when you think about things like that, you have to think really hard about, what does ethics mean in that terms? Where is your line exactly? But that's just one example of the power we have, software engineers, that we just don't think about this impact we have that we could do if we wanted to.
I guess with that example, though, like if we go with the ethics of do no harm to others, you potentially are harming a lot of other potential.
You're also helping someone too.
That's true. I'm not saying I know. Oh, jeez.
Do
Do we have a keyword?
we have a keyword?
Jim missed that, and I'm like, oh man,
I usually
that.
scream a keyword to just have a reason to drink, but
So that was maybe too personal, but they could be accurate for any of us. We could be in that position someday. Hopefully not. But let's extrapolate that out larger. So instead of a child, it's your company, and your company is about to go under. You're a startup. You're hustling. You have the ability to maybe steal some competitor secrets that would give you an edge. At that point, there's 200 people at this company, and this is like some mega corp that wouldn't even notice that these secrets are gone. So when you look at it in those terms, which again are real scenarios we could be in as software engineers, where's the ethical line? How do you know when is too far? When is the good of the many outweigh the good of the few?
I think you're like looking for a solid answer here.
There's-
You really don't.
And that's my opinion. There is no right answer,
Yeah.
but I
No,
want to
but,
hear
like,
some
where's-
thoughts.
I mean, I think it's all dependent on the circumstance, but I mean, I don't have an answer for you.
And it's also a slippery slope as well, right? So if you steal that trade information, that trade secret into your company, then that fosters that right from the very beginning. Now, from that point forward, everything you do is going to be based off of, not your own intelligence, not your own proprietary information. So now your company, everything forward is kind of almost built off a lie.
Yeah, fair. And like, how do you? Sometimes some businesses are built off patents. Like, how do you
get
patent
back to
something
that?
you just stole? So that can be another issue.
But Ryan, you hit the nail on the head. To me, there is no right answer. Obviously, in like moral philosophy, there is no right answer unless you subscribe to a particular school. However, these are just things I think as software engineers we should think about, because we have this unprecedented power. Never before in history have like so few people had the ability to change the world. But we've never once thought like, what's the extent of that power? Should we think about the limits? Should we think about self-imposed limits on things we can do? For me, it's more important just to have thought about it, at least at some point.
I think engineers have a lot of power, or more power than they think. As an example, I think at Google, a bunch of engineers spoke up and said, we don't feel comfortable with the particular software being used for, X. And they changed the course of that a little bit. And I think that was a really powerful story. And I think if you're worried about, standing up for something and losing your job, because that's hard for you to lose your job for many reasons, at least maybe you can talk to your coworkers and you have a cohort, a group that could stand together on something that you feel passionate about. And I think there's some power there with like numbers, and you can say no in groups.
Well, I'd rather be shipped back to Canada than like to stand up for something I believe in. I would definitely do it,
Yeah.
but I can see why sometimes people may not want to do that. I like the idea of just trying to facilitate those conversations and just don't go silent. I think that to me is the biggest important thing, is like bring it up, raise the concern. If the company doesn't agree and they still want to move forward, then it's on you to really decide, do you stay at that company?
I also think you just turned yourself into a Nike meme.
Just do it. All right.
But in software engineering, especially, because at least in the States and parts of Europe, we're some of the highest paid people out there. So the moral dilemma is real, because we have a choice between money and doing what we feel is right. And often I feel like we choose the money and we just kind of like push aside our moral qualms. So it's more like, in general, what's the best way of getting people to think about the ethics of the things that they do, the things that they build?
I mean, I'd even be interested in some examples of like where we actually face some of these things within some of the code that we're doing. Like, what are some areas that, maybe you felt a little bit weird. Jem, you mentioned like building pop-up ads or building ads. Is that really bad? Like, someone may actually feel that that's okay. That's they're doing their job and building a mechanism to promote other products, and we may not find that great, but that could actually be okay. So I'm interested to know, like, others on the panel, what are some things that we've created along the way that maybe felt weird, or maybe you pushed back on, maybe you left the company because of that?
well, I mean, I didn't create way. But I feel like one example that kind of stands out, and Uber has definitely changed a lot these past few years. So I'm not trying to take jabs at them, but there was this like article about how this interviewer came to like interview with the CEO or some high executive, and they came down immediately when her Uber like stopped at the building, and she was like, "Oh, how did you know that I arrived?" And he's like, "Oh, I was like looking at you, on this like God mode."
Ooh.
If we have a link to the article, I'm sure we'll link it. And yeah, I'm sure and this like example kind of stands out to me because it's like I'm sure someone coded it, and probably like the intentions weren't for some executive to go look God mode at whoever they wanted. Maybe there was like some actual reasons for like customer support needed to find like you lost your cell phone and they needed to track and you knew the last Uber, they could help you with your permission and something like that. Like there's like justifications for that, but it's definitely tough, right? Like how do you like know as someone who's like programming it, like what the intentions it will be used for all the time up front.
Yeah, there's some interest like with the software that Atlassian makes. It's very meta. It's meta software to make other pieces of software. So, are there companies that are using our software to make bad things? Maybe. You don't know because often you don't know all the customers that are using your thing, and even if you build your things with good intention and ethical standards, people could use your software to do things that are not ethical, and that's kind of hard. I've struggled with that. I think like how do I balance that I know that I think I'm working on something that's very ethical, or my standards are never being challenged, but who someone else using the thing that I built is, and that's kind of a tough one. I've tough thing for me.
APIs for someone else to leverage, and you're like, I don't know what they're going to do with this, but I'm still creating these APIs. It's not really your fault if they're used malicious, but they could be.
But yeah, but it's something to think about that it sits in the back of your brain.
There an example of I think the times when a company I worked for did the morally, ethically right thing was it was a subscription service, and you get a free trial or whatever, and the choice was to either alert the user to let them know that, hey, we're about to start billing you, or to not alert them and just silently bill them. And I've seen companies do it both ways, and fortunately the company I was at decided to not, or to send the email, let you know like, hey, we're about to bill you. But there are examples, audible.com, I'm calling you out, of companies that will sign you up for service and then silently bill you for as long as possible, and even not notify you as much as possible so that you're being billed. That to me is like unethical. It's like it's pretty clear what's right and wrong. But again, at the bottom line, if you have to feed your family, at what point do you say like, no, this is too much. This is not right.
Yeah, to actually feed into that on the opposite, or you talked about positive of emailing someone to say, hey, your subscription, or you're going to be billed for this. I've worked at a company where kind of similar. It wasn't really a subscription based, or I guess it was in the sense that you were paying for added features. And there was this point where we were actively not emailing customers that were paying, that were inactive, like they weren't using the product. And instead of like, sending them marketing emails or anything, like they would be removed from the list, just almost to not remind them is like you're getting billed for this. And I felt like that to me felt really wrong. And then in the flip side of it is like having a subscription where it's like, hey, you have this free trial, just a reminder, you will get billed, is kind of nice, because I've been there. I once paid for a service that Microsoft had. I was paying for it for like, it's my own bad. I paid for it like a good year or two without really realizing. It was so small, it was on my credit card that I didn't really notice the line item. And I never used the product, but like was continuing to bill it, and I never saw any like reminder and email. And it's like, that's on me a little bit for not paying attention to like the byline on my Visa statement, but still, I mean, that kind of sucked.
My not favorite, but I think a well-known example is Theriac 25. Sound familiar to anybody? Theriac 20. So it's one of the clear-cut cases where bad programming has killed somebody. So Theriac 25 in the 80s was a kind of a radiation machine. It would do targeted radiation. And it turned out the software engineer or software engineers, there's a race condition in there where the machine would just keep bombarding the person with radiation because it didn't know how to stop, because there's a race condition. And it literally killed somebody. so that's an instance of like there are downstream consequences of, let's say, not doing enough QA, not doing enough testing. But again, we have to balance that with the real life. We need to ship things as well. Has there ever been an instance where you're like, I'm unsure about this scenario? There could be consequences, but I need to get out the door anyways. I know I've been in several, but I've been talking this whole time. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like that stupid mantra, "Go fast and break things" or whatever. I don't like that, and I think
Facebook literally had that, but they've since changed.
They have since changed. But when like the break things is like break humans, like don't do it. Test more.
Well, and I guess into that point is like Facebook. Like, I mean, okay, all right. They could break the fact that you can't like post something on Facebook, but we've now relied on something like Facebook, Twitter, text messages, and all these things have become so important that breaking something for your users can actually lead to like an emergency, like where I'm like needing to get a hold of you, Stacy, because of X, Y, and Z happened, and I can't because something's broken. That could actually be very problematic. At first, I'd be like, well, it's not the end of the world. It's just social media. But we've now turned to really rely on these, so that can be an even bigger problem.
I think even like to the move fast and break things point, it can be more insidious as well, because when you say move fast and break things, a lot of times people use that as an excuse for growth, but it's not so much as I mean, yes, there are consequences for more serious products where you might break people or to that effect, but other companies like Facebook and Instagram that build bad habits over time because they're growing their user base are really trying to get you hooked on social media almost to the point of being addictive. And that's part of the move fast break things. The breaking is less obvious, but I think that there's still kind of a duty to users to consider the ramifications that this has on their life. Like what are the habits that you're building? Or what are the habits that you're breaking? Are they good habits that you're breaking? Are they bad habits that you're creating? And I think that's not something we talk about a lot, but move fast, break things means growth, and growth isn't always healthy for us.
Is it cool, or is it okay to be building something that people are addicted to?
I think that's a really hard question. I think we all, obvious.
I'm a big fan of sitting on Instagram or like Twitter. I love it. But yeah, like when I'm bored or just like waiting for someone or like anything like that, I'm on there. And is that good? I don't know.
Actually, it's true. And one thing that I kind of want to give a big shout out to is like for Google and Apple, like they've started like including like things to see how much time you spend on the phone. I think like Android announced at Google I/O, like they're announcing this thing which will like tell you like how often you're on your phone, and will even like alert you to like not be on your phone so much. So I think like those kind of ethics, yeah, I think they definitely play a big role, and like it's good to see some like tech companies starting to like address that in their own ways.
Yeah, I mean iOS 12 released today, and that has some of those features in there to actually monitor, and you don't have to use it, but it tells you that you're using your devices too much. It has like parent controls in there for your kids, which I think, yes, those should have been there a long time ago. I'm glad to see that. So it is nice to see some of these options. They're opt-in, which is fine too. I don't think that's a problem. If I'm addicted to Instagram and I enjoy it, I guess I'm going to keep using it.
So that I'll give a devil's advocate. Like, what gives private companies the moral authority to tell me what I can and cannot do? If, like, let's say Google says using my phone too long is too much. Like, we just think it's bad for you. We're going to automatically shut down your phone after a certain amount of time. Like,
but I think that's what they're doing. They're not doing that. They're giving you the opt-in.
But like, take it one step further.
Yeah,
where a company could do that if they wanted to.
Could, but why? Why would they want to do that?
They could.
Yeah, I mean, I would not like that at all.
Nobody cares what you want.
Yeah.
$1 trillion companies, like, they can impose these things at will. But what if collectively all the engineers and product managers say, like, we're doing this for the public good. Kids game too much, so we want to cut off their gaming time. Like, is it in their purview? Is it in our purview to say that? Or is it let people, First Amendment, like, you do whatever you want because you are an adult or you're an independent person?
I look at it as on the individual. I think like giving those controls and setting that tone is super helpful, and they should be there. But no, I don't think it's the company's job to set that tone or decide that, hey, Stacey, you've been watching too much Netflix, or you've been playing too many video games, like, and shut it off for you. I think it's more having those mechanisms are helpful and those controls, but I don't think it's really on them to decide what people are doing.
So does it come down to like ethics and software engineering as a matter of just transparency? In terms of using these products, like, iOS 12 gives us the information about the different products that we're using, but hey, I'm still addicted to Instagram. I know I spend hours on it every week. I still use it, but at least now I know that because iOS 12 told me. And that comes down to transparency, I think. I mean, what I'm hearing, at least what you guys are saying, is that now we have the information, but we don't think that companies should have the ability to make that decision, but at least they're giving us the information. And if more of them did that and were more transparent, perhaps there's the morality in software engineering, or part of it, the beginning of it.
I like the transparency. I think you've hit it right.
Yeah,
I feel comfortable
100%.
with that. I love that. That's a good way to put it, is that just being transparent and saying, like, yeah, I'm cool with the amount of times I use that app, but yeah, that's cool. Thanks for servicing it, but I'm still going to keep going. Or I might question and go, oh, wow, I should probably do something else.
Well, the tool exists. I mean, without the tool, we would have no idea, and we wouldn't be able to make the decisions for ourselves. But I don't know. Is that the beginning?
So I understand where you're coming from. I disagree with transparency being like that's the solution. For instance, end user license agreements, everything is buried in there. Like somewhere in there, you could be like, Ryan, you just signed over your child.
You didn't know it.
But like, there are people that are comfortable, and lots of companies do it, are comfortable with saying like, well, the user could have read that, and they didn't. But we are being as transparent as possible. It literally says we will sell your data to everybody. People are like, oh yeah, we click OK. But like, and that's what I want to get to. Like the core of ethics is like, where's the line? You're saying like I inform the user, therefore I am absolved of all responsibility. But that's just not true in so many cases.
I think informing, you're saying almost, because I'm sorry, but like no one reads the terms of use.
I was about to say.
I think companies know that, but having a feature that like iOS 12, let's pick on that because it literally is just released today, is they're calling it out as a feature. They're actually trying to be very transparent and sell it as a feature that these new controls. I believe when you upgrade it, even kind of talks about that in there. And so I think that to me is more transparent than putting it in some like hidden, data line that we're going to sell your data. I think companies at that point, that is unethical. It's like they're literally trying to hide that from you, and they're saying, well, you agreed, but you had to agree to move forward. Like you had to agree to sign up for this, or you had to agree to use this product, whatever it is. And so that seems a little bit less transparent. I think to Mars's point, it's more transparent in the sense that we're demonstrating this, we're showing you that, hey, there's this data that you're using, or you're using this product a lot, just surfacing this so you know, and then you can choose what to do. But I think the hidden text is, yes, maybe that fits into that unethical part.
Maybe it's like visible, intentional transparency.
But that's so relative.
I know.
Is so relative about what's visible. A lawyer would argue the end user license agreement is completely transparent and visible. You can scroll and read, and it's in.
And even if they did, like, all right, if it wasn't in like 10-point font, and even if it was like in 25-point font, who knows that legal jargon? It is not easy to read, and so that to me is there's still hidden language in there, and nobody's going to read that.
So I'll post a question to Ryan, because I know you work on TV often. You work on TV UI. Let's say you create a new feature, and the user, like, you have to click through it because I bought this TV. I have to click through it. So we act like there's a choice a lot of times. We're like, well, you clicked OK, but oftentimes there's no choice. There's Android and there's Apple. There's not much, but I still need a phone. I still need a phone to function. So like Ryan, TV is a good example because I know there is software out there that like will track the users, track their watching habits, things like that. It's built into the TV. You can't use the TV without using that software.
And it's outside of the applications. Like if I'm watching like Amazon or Hulu or Netflix, it's outside of that.
Yeah, and I know Ryan, OG Ryan Anklo. We've had discussions on things like this before.
What's the question?
The question is like, how do you balance? Like we say, oh, users have a choice, but not necessarily. It's like the illusion of choice. You have to click accept. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Right, and I mean, with in the TV example, right, there is a choice, and I think the company that you're talking about that was tracking the stuff, that came out and it was a very public issue for that manufacturer, and I think people chose to go a different way, right? And in your phones thing, I think the market will correct a lot of those things where a company is doing something shady or is limiting something that doesn't give the users power, right? So if, let's say it's Android versus iOS, and they both decide to limit your use of particular applications, I think the market would still correct that. I think there's other manufacturers out there. People could start using feature phones again, right? And stop staring at screens and start spending time with their family a little bit more. I think market will generally take care of violently or very, very unethical companies, right? So,
and I think it goes back to similar points that were made earlier too, is that like I think Stacy, you talked about even with internally people being vocal on things or like getting together as a group. Well, if a company is doing something that's like feels unethical and wrong, as a group on the internet, like as a community, we can absolutely change and shift that. As like people choose not to buy something, we do have options. And you're right, if Android and iOS both go in one direction, well, that just opens the door for a new company to be created and hopefully correct that.
Yeah, actually, I actually thought that terms and condition was like a really good example, and I was like, oh, that's a great example of like transparency. And the thing that kind of irks me about it, because I think it's a super valid point, it is the company being transparent, but they're being transparent to cover their own asses. Like it's like to cover liability. It's not for the intention of, hey, users, you should know about all this stuff, right? This is more of like, hey, don't sue us. Here's some formal written documentation. Like there are some companies that have started doing this thing where they'll take their terms and conditions and then they'll make them they'll summarize them in like very
human readable.
Yeah. I was like
non-lawyer.
I was like, how would I describe myself? Intelligence isn't like that of a human, but I mean, it would literally my reading level is like really low. So
It'd be literally showing source code for most users.
Yeah.
That is not really useful to majority of people.
I'm glad you brought up source code. So a few weeks ago, there was an incident where a fairly public and prolific JavaScript library author, this person created a new license where they said, any of these companies that are working with immigration and custom enforcement cannot use my software because I disagree morally with their stance. And because I wrote the software, it is within my rights to say that. What is everybody's thoughts on something like that?
I mean, it is his right. It's like, but it depends. Was it open source before?
Yep.
Yeah, then that's kind of tough to like claw it back. But I think if I've created something myself, I have the right to open source that. I have the right to share that with maybe just you, Jem, or this panel. I don't know. That's really tough though when it's been open and then you're clawing it back. That might be very difficult.
Go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say it takes a lot of courage to do that. So I just want to kind of give a shout out for that. I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage to like kind of like take your software that's helping many people probably depend on it, and then just shut it off to like stand up for something that you truly believe in. So lots of respect for that. Whether it's ethical, I think actually I'm really glad that kind of happened because it started a lot of conversations about open source and a lot of ethics. Like how involved does open source get into it? And I agree with Ryan. Like it is kind of awkward because like they kind of licensed it, but then like because it was open source before, pretty much old iterations are still available. So it's not necessarily like it's not going to solve the problem per se, but if the intention, which this is what I believe it was for, if the intention is to like make it like known, like call out like these kind of things, then it really did its job very well. So,
Ryan, you're gonna say something?
No, I was just gonna actually pose another question that kind of goes back to one of the earlier points you made about surgeons need to be certified, engineers need to be certified. There's a process. Does software engineering need a certification process? And does it need to be as specialized as different verticals within software engineering have their own different code of ethics and certification process that people need to go through?
I think it wouldn't hurt.
I think it's, I mean, I think largely it's in the context of which you are a software engineer. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are certifications if you're working in certain high, like, touch, I guess, areas, like, you know, you're developing software for airplane guidance, or, you know, NASA or drones, you know, that kind of thing. And I think that does, I mean, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that exists. But what's interesting is that, like, software engineering, like, everything now is online, and software engineering as a profession and the industry has grown so much that I guess no one really saw the need for it. We were sort of just building tools quickly that were useful without considering the ramifications and with no formal process in place. Which, one, I think is the beauty of software engineering, but two, it does pose some problems.
It's a yin yang, because software is open. Anybody can become a software engineer tomorrow. But the problem is anybody can become a software engineer tomorrow, whether or not they're qualified. I'll stay away from self-driving cars because that one's an easy target. But let's say banking software. Let's say I push a bug, people can't log into their bank account. Somewhere, tens of thousands of people out there can't close a house. They can't, like, pay their mortgage because I pushed a small bug. So maybe there should be some sort of certification. But again, like, I don't know what that would give us.
The mistake could still happen.
The mistake could still happen, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, is like, we still ship bugs. No matter how great we are, that's why we have QA. That's why a job exists. And that's why you need to check everything. And no matter how many certifications are done, it's still going to happen. Maybe it happens less. Maybe.
It's interesting because, like, there's, like, kind of a software engineer level, but then also I feel there are some ethics on, like, the product level. Like, one thing that I've kind of thought about was, like, ride sharing apps. And, like, on one hand, they provide tons of jobs for people who are crowdsourcing, but then it takes away a lot of jobs from, like, taxis and stuff. Like, Airbnb takes away a lot, maybe competing with hotels and stuff. And I think there has been some ethical, like, moral conversations of if that's right. And then I think the government has kind of stepped in to try to, like, mitigate, try to make the balance kind of okay. But that's always also been something that's I've never really.
What do you think of it? What's your opinion? Is it
I
good,
totally,
is it good to take away the jobs of taxi drivers and hotels?
It's tough. Like, I don't know. I'm a huge fan of open source, and therefore I'm kind of a huge fan of crowdsourcing. I feel like by the people, if people want to do something and there's something that can set it up for them. Like, it's literally like if I wanted to call my friend and pay him like a few bucks to pick me up, like, Uber and Lyft have just made an app to just kind of do that. And I think it's awesome to, like, just meet new people who, like, want to, like, try it out and stuff. But
yeah, I think for me it was literally taking these old school business models and putting a spin on it and saying, like, hey, there's more room for competition. And to me, some of the regulations that are coming in, I don't know. I question that a little bit too. Is like, where's the money coming to support the regulations? Is it from these old school businesses? Maybe not. But so I struggle with that one a little bit.
I think I've been reading a book about moral psychology, and there's a quote in there that I thought was really fascinating that kind of relates to this, and it says, like, the most important principle for designing an ethical society is to make sure that everyone's reputation is on the line at all the time, so that bad behavior will always bring bad consequences. And I think sometimes the market is that correction, but also maybe sometimes the market doesn't correct it, and maybe that's government. And so that's where those lines get a little blurry. But I think if they're, we asked about, certifications. I think that's just like, if you break your certification, you break your moral and ethical code, there's a consequence for that. And I think that consequences at multiple levels, I guess.
So we almost need more consequences at that point?
I think there are a lot of consequences. I think that's maybe what holds the fabric of an ethical society together, and some of it's government, and it's the balance between all of those that has created the fact that we have society and that we can, continue on as a human species.
Do you mind if I jump in real quick, Jim? I was just going to say, because this particular part of the topic I have a lot of interest in, because of the unintended consequences that often come from the things we build. And I thought the talk about Uber was one that fascinated me, because I read an article at one point that talked about that, particularly in certain immigrant communities in cities like New York and other big cities, they had it was like a dream of certain people to earn enough to buy the taxi medallion, so they didn't have to pay, have to give a portion of their earnings to, the company that owned the medallions and so on, and how people had put their life savings into these things, only to find, because of Uber and Lyft and all that, the unintended consequences being that it just drove that those are now underwater and they're stuck with huge debts to pay off these taxi medallions, and it's kind of ruined them financially. But it's not something that as developers we would have ever thought about when we're creating that product. But there are complex ramifications of what it was, what we built effectively.
I think
on the flip side, do you think it was also wrong in a way, or maybe so it was almost so difficult for people to afford buying those medallions that now having Uber and Lyft has actually opened the door for more people able to participate in, essentially being taxi drivers without having to pay for these medallions, because people were like spending, like it was a basically to get a medallion. So I think it hurt some people, but it also opened the door for others.
That's true. And I have mixed feelings about it, because and this is more about business models than it is about, say, the code that we write to create the product. I have mixed feelings about it, because at the same time you talk to like an Uber driver or Lyft driver, and they're like, yeah, I'm not even 100% sure this is worth it. I'm not making any money. And these people used to put their kids through college on that salary, on the money they made as taxi drivers, right? So, and here these people are on this second job, and they're not even sure it's worth it as extra cash. So, but again, that's more business model than it is like that. I can't blame the developers for that. That's not, unnecessary. Although you can kind of say, well, you are continuing to build something even after we know these things, right? How does that affect you?
I think also it's really interesting example, which is not something we're really like as individuals engineers, we have a code of ethics, and now we can turn to Uber and say what it's done to the taxi industry and everything. But at the time, and I kind of doubt that the software engineers building the product had enough context to know that was going to happen. And when you are kind of an individual contributor in a company, you don't necessarily have that context. And then that goes back to what Brian was saying about business models. Someone at that company probably did have that context, didn't share it with everybody. And so at that point, our ethics and morals as software engineers, we can't even enforce them or have an opinion because we don't even know the ramifications of what we're doing.
And maybe that's a reason why diversity in your group of in diversity in tech matters, because maybe if you had people that maybe had come here from different countries and had perspective on what the culture was in their country and how it might affect people that live where they live, that would have come up sooner, maybe. Those things matter for.
It's not just within individual contributors, it's diversity in leadership.
Absolutely.
That would absolutely change some perspectives. And to Mars's point, the individual contributor understand the full picture, which hopefully to the transparency comment they do, because that really helps, but that's not always the case. But yeah, diversity is super important at that point.
That's an excellent point, Stacey. And it's a good segue into yes, diversity is important, diversity of thought. People that think differently from you, because a lot of times software engineers, we have this perspective on the world, but especially here in Silicon Valley, it's a very American, US-centric perspective on how things should be, and we don't take account, the other 7.7 billion people around the planet, but we just impose that our thoughts and beliefs on people without thinking. And again, like Brian said earlier, there are no easy answers. It's more what I really want people to take away from this is that to have just think a little bit critically about the things you're building. And it's hard to imagine the long-term consequences, but there are. And every line of code we rely, someone's relying on that, and it can alter their life one way or the other. Yeah, it sounds like we're high and mighty, we're great software engineers to build things, but the truth is we touch people's lives every day, in a real way. So it's something we really need to think about carefully. before I open up to, I think we have a few more minutes.
Yeah,
my
we're
friend.
we're running down to the last few minutes here, but it has been a really, really, really fascinating discussion. I think you guys brought up a lot of really interesting points and a lot of, it's not an easy topic, and obviously not a topic we as developers like to consider very often. I love the example of that open source license, because I brought that one up in various contexts, because never mind that the ethical implications, it also brings up the fact that we don't even pay attention to these licenses normally as developers, the same way the end user doesn't pay attention to the EULA that they're agreeing to.
Thanks for watching.